My first guest tonight is an actor, producer, yoga instructor, and former Pope with a series on Hulu called Little Fires Everywhere and a movie on Netflix called American Son. She is at home just like the rest of us. Say hello to Kerry Washington. Hi, Kerry.
Hi, Jimmy. That was quite the intro.
Kerry, I didn't realize you were such a talented artist. I'm looking at your wall and seeing these starfish.
Are you so proud of me?
I'm very
Um,
proud of you. I give you an A and a star.
this is my joy. I feel like kids' artwork makes everybody smile. So, I just try to share a little bit of my kids' talent with you.
Speaking of kids, you and I were part of the Dear Class of 2020 virtual online graduation
Yeah.
ceremony. I don't know what it was. It was a big video. A bunch of people spoke.
Big party. Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I taped mine like a month ago. So it was
It was so
before
weird. Wasn't it
the
crazy?
protests. And my advice was don't show up late with coffee in your hand, which seems, I don't know, it doesn't seem like it's such important advice anymore. What was the germ of your advice to the graduates?
I was freaked out because I had written it before, all of these
Right.
protests and this incredible moment that we are in defense of Black lives. And so I had written this speech, which was still kind of apropos about like, don't try to go back to normal, create your new normal. And then like a week ago, President Obama put a post up about all the protests saying those words. And I was like, oh, now everybody's going to think that I just stole the president's Twitter and turned it into a commencement address. So that sucks. But I guess, on a lot of levels, whether we're dealing with the pandemic of racism or the pandemic of COVID, like we are in the moment of a new normal. Like we cannot go backwards. We have to figure out how to take better care of each other going forward.
Are you surprised by how many people have participated in these protests? The march yesterday in Hollywood had 20,000 people. Does that surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me. It fills me with so much hope and encouragement, and I feel like we as a nation and as a world in some ways, we're just done having our governments work in ways that don't reflect our values. Like I think for a long time people thought you could just be a passenger in this train called democracy, but that's not how it works. Like a democracy works if we all show up and we all express our values, whether it's voting or in the streets protesting. Like that is what democracy looks like. So it's like we're living up to who we were supposed to be this all along.
Your kids are about the same age as my younger kids.
Yeah.
What are you telling them? Are they aware of what's going on? Do you explain any of this to them?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of posts about privilege looks like um, discovering that racism exists as opposed to knowing that it exists. So I think for a lot of Black families, we don't have the privilege of ignoring what's going on and pretending that it's not happening. But the thing I've been thinking about a lot, honestly, with my kids, I've been thinking, and with my friends' kids, I've been thinking a lot about education and a lot about talking about race and introducing ideas of race and really thinking about the idea that for a lot of kids, kids are introduced to race at Black History Month or in the context of change makers like Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks. And I think it's really important that we start to introduce the idea of race with a Black history that begins before teaching kids about what Black people were told they couldn't do, right? So there's Maasai warriors and the kingdoms of Ghana and Queen Nefertiti and the pyramids of Egypt. Alicia Keys talks about this a little bit in her new memoir that's so beautiful, More Myself. But this idea of like teaching kids that Black history and Black people were a lot of things before segregation and Jim Crow and the civil rights movement, so that we understand like the beautiful complexity and like elegance and richness of Black history before not, refusing to be put in the back of the bus.
When you were on our show, I think it was in November when we were in
Hmm.
studio, you were promoting your Netflix is a play that you turned into a movie, American Son, which has now become, has had a second wave of interest because of the subject matter.
Yeah, I play a mom named Kendra. The whole play and now movie takes place an hour and a half in real time in the lobby of a police precinct. It's a Black mom and a white dad who are desperately looking for their 18-year-old son. It's 3 a.m. He hasn't come home. So it's that, like, every parent's worst nightmare of wondering where your teenage kid is, with the added layer, the added complexity that so many of us are understanding now of being a Black parent and knowing that your kid isn't just up against like knucklehead adolescent behavior, but up against systems of, racist institutions that put your kid's life at risk. So the film is really so close to my heart. And we're actually, because there's been so much, like a huge resurgence of people watching it and saying like, oh, now I get it, or I have a lot more questions. We're going to do a live tweet. You know me. I love a live tweet, Jimmy.
Yes.
We're doing a live tweet this week on Thursday. And then afterward, actually, I'm going to do an Instagram Live with Kimberly Crenshaw. So she started the African American Policy Forum, and basically they're the people who invented the Say Her Name campaign, this campaign to focus on the mothers and the loved ones of women who have been killed by police officers. And so Kimberly and I are going to do a discussion about American Son, talk about how people can be part of the solution, raise money for AAPF and Say Her Name, and, educate people not just on the characters like my son in the film, who is up against so much, but also a lot of the women that haven't been mentioned, the Sandra Blands, the Breonna Taylors. So getting people to focus on the ways that this injustice impacts families across the board, male, female.
So you're saying that Twitter can be used for positive reasons.
It
Interesting. All right, we're going to take a break. Kerry Washington is with us. We'll be right back. We are back with Kerry Washington. She is in her house. I'm in my house. You're probably in yours right now. Kerry has a show called Little Fires Everywhere on Hulu, which is not, that's with Reese Witherspoon. This is not Big Little Lies with Reese Witherspoon, despite the little being in both titles there.
That is true. Big little, lots of little, many little. No, this is Little Fires Everywhere. Yes,
it's a show about friends in the 90s, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a show about like two very different women played by myself and Reese. And they're really different mothers. They're really different professionals. And they kind of would normally not ever cross paths, but they get thrust into each other's lives because of their kids. And it's kind of how that explodes their families and their understandings of each other. And it's interesting. People... the 90s were a time when we all talked about how important, well, not we all, but where a lot of people thought that the focus or the goal was to be colorblind, as opposed to what my dear friend Melody Hobson calls being color brave. And so it's one of the things we sort of explore in the show is having the courage to be in the reality and talk about privilege and race. But the show's also just about like being a mother and being a daughter and being an artist. It's about family secrets. It's a big mystery. It's a lot.
Speaking of family, you did a show, and I wonder if you're planning to do more of these with your dad on Instagram.
Yes.
A dad jokes show.
Yes.
Yes. Whose idea? Was that his idea or your idea?
So my dad's a star. I directed last night's episode of Insecure, and he was a featured background actor in that as well.
I saw pictures on your Twitter or Instagram, one of those two, of your dad.
Yeah, he does. He's always, my whole life, he's been somebody who can find the humor in a situation and find the laugh, and often through these very corny dad jokes. So we like to showcase my dad's humor.
What makes a great dad joke? Can you quantify that?
Yeah, I would say a great dad joke is one that you don't want to like because it's so corny, but you have to laugh at. Like one that just like, despite your better judgment, you just have to laugh.
It's irresistible.
Irresistible, much like my father.
Each night, I've been making a donation to a charity of our guest's choosing. You chose the African American Policy Forum. That's aapf.org. Tell us a little bit about that real quickly, Kerry.
So yeah, I mentioned before, for some reason, a lot of the women's names, a lot of the women who have been the victim of police killings, those names have not been celebrated and honored. And APF works to make sure that that is not the case. Hashtag Say Her Name campaign is really about fighting Black women's invisibility so that women like Breonna Taylor get justice. I mean, those officers who, Breonna Taylor was an EMT in Louisville. She was working on the front lines of COVID. She was one of our heroes, and who could imagine that what took her life was not this devastating virus, but a debacle of a police raid. They didn't, it is unfathomable that these officers are not in custody. So really saying her name, saying Sandra Bland, Corinne Gaines, just remembering that Black women are victims of police brutality and police violence as well is so important to me. So we're going to be talking about it when we talk about American Son. I'm so happy that you're supporting this important organization.
aapf.org. Thank you, Kerry. I always love talking to you, and thanks for everything you're doing. Take care.
Thank
Kerry
you.
Washington. We'll be right back.
Jimmy Kimmel Live. This is ridiculous.